going forward, next we have on our list Esoterix systems. Esoteric Systems will present GKT, Crowd AI, and SeatFinder Plus. GKT underpins personalization, including information incentives to use quieter trains, whether for social distancing or to smooth excessive demand. Crowd AI predicts crowding on individual train services, something to which passengers are particularly sensitive at the moment. We will hear first from John Backway about how South Eastern Railway and Esoteric Systems have worked together to find solutions to capacity management. John Backway is the head of retail at South Eastern Railway, one of the UK's largest train operators. He oversees fares and ticketing projects at South Eastern, including the Key Smart Card. John also manages the company's digital channels, which have most recently been updated to include the innovative SeatFinder tool. And then we'll hear from Liz Davidson, the co-founder and chief marketing officer of Esoteric Systems, who will tell us more about the project's outcomes. Over to John.
Great, thank you very much, Vanita. First of all, I must apologise. My neighbours just started to have some work done on our house unexpectedly this afternoon, so it might be a bit noisy in the background. Apologies if you can hear some hammering. Well, good afternoon. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about South Eastern's partnership with Esoterix. And we first started working with Esoterix back in December 2019, when our parent company, Go Ahead Group, ran a technology accelerator programme called the Billion Journeys project. And the vision of that accelerator was to improve customer experience in transport through innovation. Esoterix was invited to join that accelerator, which ran during the early part of 2020. And we asked Esoterix to help us manage demand on peak time services. It's hard to remember now, but back then our demand outstripped supply on many of our commuter trains, and we had lots of issues with overcrowding. Esoterix helped to design a demand management ticketing product, which was intended to help move passengers to quieter services. The concept was built, and just as we were about to launch that, COVID-19 came along, and the lockdown measures that were put into place meant that it wasn't really feasible or desirable to launch a pilot program at that time. Happily though, just a month or so earlier, Esoterix had actually submitted a bid to this first of a kind initiative with a vision to build out that technology from the Billion Journeys project into something bigger. And it's the outputs of that project that are being presented today. With demand for rail services still far lower than in pre-pandemic times, overcrowding isn't really so much of a problem for rail operators at the present time, but our customers very much care about how busy their train will be so that they can safely socially distance on board. Last autumn, we introduced a tool called SeatFinder, which has traffic light indications showing customers how busy our trains are likely to be. And that's been really well received by our customers. But we wanted to take that concept further, make it even more meaningful. And our partnership with Esoterix and the First of a Kind Innovate UK Fund has allowed that to happen. So it's both timely and highly relevant. I'd now like to hand over to Liz from Esoterix, who will explain more about the benefits the customers will see from this technology and how it all works.
Thank you very much, John. We are just also having a slight technical issue while we work out how to share the slides. Just bear with us a sec. Okay, it looks like it's in hand. Great, thank you very much. So our project was called Dynamic Capacity Management. And could you move on to the first slide, please, Alan? So as John has just mentioned, before COVID, operating trains was to some extent a numbers game. Passenger numbers have been growing year on year for decades. And South Eastern had recognised that overcrowding had, for them, become an expensive constraint, requiring extra services at peak times when there was an abundant spare capacity at other times. We began working with South Eastern through the Billion Journey project, and our brief was to explore managing demand more effectively through greater passenger engagement and incentives. The idea was to provide an improved journey experience and to contribute to the greater social good through reduced crowding for everyone. Could you move to the next slide, please? And then this happened. Those passenger numbers, which had so reliably been growing year on year, plummeted. And although the curve is now beginning to turn up again, it is clear that we are not heading back to the old normal. In particular, the previously captive commuter market has been subject to massive and rapid experiment in home working. Employers who were previously doubtful have realized that it can be as productive and that they can save money on office costs and widen their talent pool. And employees who have enjoyed a healthier work-life balance and saved money on commuting costs will also be looking to continue working from home on at least a part-time basis. Recent surveys report that in the wake of COVID-19, where people do need to travel, they perceive traveling by car as safer. In short, this means that rail faces a resurgent competition from both the private car and new competition from the broadband network. In almost all other markets, the best way to compete in such circumstances is to get closer to the customer and to understand their needs and wants and build experiences and products which appeal to them. Rail really has little other option. The majority of its costs are fixed, meaning if passenger numbers remain low, it will need to cut services, which would make it less attractive to alternatives, meaning less people will use it, and so on. It is a vicious circle that we cannot afford as we strive to meet our net zero goal. So we must engage passengers as individuals to offer a more personalised journey experience that builds their confidence and loyalty. Southeastern had already recognised this was the path to a better network, and this project has been about putting that into practice. Next slide, please. First challenge was to understand who was using which service and how often. We had to get to know them. Before I go any further, we're going to play a short video. Could you play the video?
Meet Sam. She regularly travels by train. But when Sam taps at a gate, where she goes next is lost. Get to know them links Sam to the trains that she uses, learning where she goes and when. It even fills in the gaps if she forgets to tap. And if her regular train is busy or affected by timetable changes, it can suggest alternatives. By getting to know how Sam travels, you can offer her a personalised experience that builds confidence and loyalty. And the same goes for Billy, Keisha, Peter, Deepa, Simon, Nicole, John, Alicia, Mark, Andy, Sean, Chris, George, Paul, Rosie, Siobhan, Adam.
So GKT, it stands for Get to Know Them. And yes, some of you might be thinking there should be a missing T, it should be GT, KT, but as you can see, that's a bit of a mouthful, so GKT it is. And GKT links smart card taps from entries at barriers to live arrivals and departure times for trains, linking passengers to which services they've used. It builds a person-by-person profiles of people who travels where and when, and we can begin to infer why those journeys have been made. It also helps us to fill in missing gaps. For example, when the ticket barriers are open at one end of a regular commute, and it detects changes in patterns of behaviour. We're going to take a look at a couple of high-level examples now. Could you move to the next slide, please? So in this example, we're looking at the travel profile for one passenger. The vertical axis is the number of days per week travelled, and the horizontal axis is the week of the year in 2020. And we can see that pre-COVID, this person was travelling regularly 5 or sometimes 6 days a week, but that their travel stopped completely during the lockdowns. The red line shows when those changes were detected by the system, and then GKT goes back to determine when those changes occurred. Can we go to the next slide, please? In this example, the vertical axis is the time of morning travel. The passenger in this case continued to travel throughout the lockdown, but changed their time of travel to earlier in the day. Of course, looking at profiles one by one, it's easy to see what passengers did, but GKT looks at all passengers simultaneously, comparing them to discern global patterns so operators can segment them according to their behaviour. Being able to identify patterns of behaviour means that we can begin to infer intent, For example, there may be common traits in travel habits which imply the passenger might soon relinquish their full-time season ticket. It gives operators the opportunity to spot a flight risk and target them with the appropriate marketing comms to retain them. Next slide, please. So in summary, GKT, or get to know them, matches passenger taps to trains. It learns from behavior and detects behavior change and can fill in gaps. It helps operators develop personalized products and communications and builds loyalty and trust in customers. GKT also gives operators the insight to proactively manage demand, which I'll come on to more shortly. But first, a little bit more about demand in general. Next slide, please. So many of you may have seen last week's Transport Focus report on attitudes to travel post-lockdown, in which disturbingly a third of people say that they will never again feel completely comfortable on public transport. There is a notorious difference between stated and revealed preference, so it doesn't mean that that third figure will last forever, but we can't take this challenge lightly. An underlying motive for that very high figure is some concern about the ability to social distance. To address this, customers want accurate information about the levels of crowding so that they can make their own decisions about how and when to travel, balancing their personal perceptions of risk and necessity. Next slide, please. In August last year, Southeastern launched Seat Finder. This service tells you, passengers, via a traffic light colour code, which trains are busy or have space. At the moment, the nature of the beast is that most trains have plenty of space, but you can see there are a few that are yellow or red. Seat Finder uses the passenger count on the equivalent service from the previous service to predict the level of crowding on the upcoming service. And an example will make it easier. So from the 8 o'clock service from Hastings to London Bridge, next Monday is likely to have similar crowding levels to this Monday's service. It's a practical and totally valid approach, but it does have some limitations. Specifically, it can't predict through timetable change, and timetable changes are a feature of the world that we're in at the moment. It lags behind underlying trends such as sustained passenger growth after the easing of lockdown, and it can't take account of future externalities such as the beginning of the school holidays. So we've developed Crowd AI, and that's a machine learning capability which addresses some of these problems. Next slide, please. Now this is an example of, just one second, bear with me. So firstly, Crowd AI predicts in time, that is around passenger travel rather than around services. And it maps that learned demand onto whatever the future timetable happens to be. And we've got an example here where the blue bars show the actual number of passengers using services along a line at a particular station in the week before a timetable change. Next slide, please. The orange bars show our predictions of passengers for the new timetabled services where we are going to have less services than there were previously. And we assume that the same number of people will travel as traveled in the previous week. Next slide, please. And the green bars show what actually happened. It's quite tricky to see on this, but hopefully you can get an idea that the model's done really quite well around 8 and 9 a.m. And it's also done really well around late morning and lunchtime. It does look, however, like the evening passengers that we thought might prefer to travel at 9 p.m. would prefer to travel later at 10 p.m. But again, this is a learning model. Next slide, please. Secondly, Crowd AI anticipates changes. It learns the patterns of demand from past data over several years, if that's available, and applies that knowledge to the future. It knows about school and bank holidays, weather, daylight hours, major spectator events, and megatrends such as lockdown easing. In this example, which I'm about to show you in a second, we looked at smart card taps across the whole of the UK during whole of the UK network during 2019. If you could play the video, please. So this line shows our predictions 28 days in advance of the train leaving. This is 21 days, 14 days, 7 days. We've got some predictions coming in 1 day before departure. And then these are the actuals. Now, what you can see is the model picks up the variation between weekday and weekend patterns really well. It also picks up the general upwards trend and anticipates the flattening during the summer school holidays, which I've shown with the black line on the graph. There are a couple of spikes that we didn't predict. This was probably down to insufficient historic data associated with spring bank holidays. We've checked the dates. But again, because this is a learning model, you'd expect to see this improving year on year. Next slide, please. So for Southeastern, Crowd AI takes information for all the trains that have physical per carriage weight sensors and returns estimates for crowding for the next 28 days. Taking those predictions along the line, Southeastern have visibility of how busy the service will be across time. We've got a short video here, which if you could just play. We've selected some times, and you can see that as you update the times, it updates the map, and you can see where the key points would be, or in this case, particularly this view, then there's not very busy. And you can see it getting busier in the afternoon. Next slide, please. So in summary, Crowd AI can take account of carriage weight data, calendar dates, seasonality, weather, seat reservations, train manager counts, and all sorts of data for a view of crowding that reaches up to 28 days into the future. We're also delighted to announce that we've recently secured additional funding to enhance Crowd AI with real-time data. This will use real-time information about how busy the train is now to give insight into how busy the train will be for passengers waiting further down the line, and ideally where they can expect to find a seat if they don't already have a reservation. So stay tuned for more developments on that project. Next slide, please. So far, we've covered an understanding of passenger behaviour and predicting how busy services will be. The final challenge is using that data to elevate the customer experience so that they feel like they have a relationship or even a friend in their train operating company. My son, in one of his PlayStation games, would call this the boss challenge. The UK's vaccine rollout is one of the most successful in the world. And the buds of spring, there is cautious optimism about the future and returning to see friends and loved ones. But it is clear that many people are afraid to travel by train. Fear is an emotion, and emotions are not rational. Customers need to be reassured that the tentative growth in customer confidence needs to be nurtured. Seatfinder Plus brings the elements we've discussed so far, insight of passenger behaviour and accurate crowding predictions together. Let me explain. Next slide, please. So we use GKT to identify which smart car passengers have travelled on any service classed as busy and therefore difficult to socially distance on during the day. We then use Crowd AI to look at the predicted crowding on that same service over the next 5 days. If it is likely to continue to be busy, we prepare personalised emails suggesting a nearby alternative service that they may like to use in the future. And what you can see on this slide is the raw output, just a few of the examples. Next slide, please. And the final emails look like this. Seatfinder takes a globally available service in Crowd AI, or the Seatfinder rather, crowding information, and makes it personal and relevant to individual customers. A feedback page on this email means that we are looking forward to hearing what passengers have and haven't found useful. And we're just in the very final stages of testing with live data and expecting to start pushing it out to passengers in the next few days. If you'd like to find out more about how passengers feel about it and what the outcomes are of that, then please do let me know, and I'd be happy to keep you updated. Next slide, please. So that's the summary of the project to date. There are multiple use cases for understanding demand at both the micro and macro levels on rail. Underpinning future revenues through retail and partner rewards, for example. And so to finish up our section, this project has developed the technology for an understanding of how smart card passengers use the network in GKT, an improved predictive capability for how busy services will be with Crowd AI, and sending personalized suggestions of alternative services to passengers on busy trains using Seatfinder Plus. Next slide, please. Like much of the world, COVID threw this project a curveball. We didn't end up doing what we'd expected to do at the beginning, but as a result, it feels like its purpose to provide a more personalized experience to rail passengers is arguably more relevant than ever. We'd very much like to thank the DFT, Innovate UK, the Knowledge Transfer Network, and of course, John Backway and all at Southeastern and Go Ahead who have supported the project in getting this far. We are really excited about its potential. Thank you for taking the time to tune in today and hear about the work. And if you'd like to find out more, my contact details are here and I'd be really happy to chat. Thank you very much.